Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning the Wheel. My name's Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology. And astrology is a wonderful tool for us to look at the world through today because we can see all of the aspects, which is what we see when we have planets talking to each other and being influenced by each other. We see the actual manifestation of this happening on the world stage today, which I find to be completely fascinating and utterly validating, which is one of the reasons I love astrology so much. And one of the things that's caught my eye is the stock market. And I've got one of my friends coming out in a few minutes to talk with us about that. But before we do, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, you'll find a couple of paragraphs of mundane astrology, meaning it applies to all of us in the world. And then I do the individual signs. I encourage you to read your sun sign and always read your rising sign at the same time. And you'll be well informed. And if you like it, support me. It keeps me going, keeps the great wheel turning, as they say. I'll be forever in your debt and forever grateful. So, without further ado, let's get on Mitchell Scott Lewis. He is an astrologer out of New York City, also known as Mitch Astro. MitchAstro.com is his website. He spent a lot of time down in the markets when he was younger and has a lot of insight as to how the markets operate under the veil of astrology. And I think it's fascinating to have that kind of idea. So, Mitch, what do you think? We are in the midst of an enormous bubble where the stock market is breaking records left and right, but can it sustain, do you think? What do you think about that?
Well, that's an interesting question, Chris, because I get that a lot, and I talk to a number of other financial astrologers that I'm friends with, and everybody's looking for the top of this bubble. Mm-hmm. I've been lecturing quite a bit the last couple of years. Was down in Baltimore. I came up to Boston to your group and did a financial lecture up there. And I'm hopefully I will have a book ready for UAC. I'm trying to put it all together from the lectures. The history of the markets is fascinating, and the stock market goes up 80% of the time. It's one of the main ways that Americans, and at this point everybody in the world, makes most of their money. If you're not a CEO or you don't inherit money or you don't invent something, you make your money either off of your house, which grows in value over 25 years and you sell it for enough money to retire on, or from the stocks. Yeah. And so whenever the market crashes, of course, what the rich people are doing is they're waiting on the sidelines to buy. They're not freaking out. They have enough money, so it doesn't matter. And as soon as the market crashes, they see bargains and they pick them up. Whereas the normal person goes, "Oh my God, I'm losing my retirement fund," and they bail out at the absolute worst time.
And they panic because they panic when they panic at the worst time. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And in 2008, I predicted, the crash of '08 a year and a half in advance, within a week of its occurrence. It was one of my great calls. I was doing a series of lectures at the Princeton Club at the time, and it's well documented, and so a lot of my friends got out, but I couldn't get them to get back in again. And I told them there would be another dip in 10 because we had a Saturn-Uranus opposition that hit not only America's chart, but it hit the New York Stock Exchange's chart, which is the stock chart that I use because that's the grandfather of the American stock markets. I look at the Dow, and I use the Dow a lot when I do lectures because it's so easy to follow. But it's the New York Stock Exchange chart, the so-called Buttonwood Agreement that took place in 1792 down on Lower Broadway, literally under a buttonwood tree. Half a dozen traders got together and said, "Let's start our own stock market," and that's how American stock market started.
Interesting.
So when that crash happened, And I had done, of course, a lot of this research because I've, like you, I've been doing this for most of my life and for so many years. And I was down on in the mercantile exchange for about 14 years, and I worked for a couple of big companies and some big hedge funds. And I was able to see astrology. In fact, my work in the stock market helped me understand the individual's chart so much better.
Right.
Because now I got a chance to see how it actually functions, how it really works. Mm-hmm. And then when a client comes to you and says, well, I have this problem, that problem, you can recognize the validity of it, as you said before, but also how it actually functions. And so what I found was that most of the market crashes, bubbles and crashes. That's what my book is going to be about. The bubbles occur under certain aspects, and the crashes occur under certain aspects. Almost always, because there's always a few that that stick in your throat because you can't quite prove it with that one. But I would say 90% of the crashes happen because Saturn is in affliction to an outer planet, to what we call the generational planets.
Right. The Uranus, Neptune, Pluto.
That's
Jupiter,
right.
Yeah.
And well, Jupiter will also, when Saturn is in Sag or Jupiter is in Capricorn, you will also very often see this kind of a situation. But it's almost always with a conflict to the outer planets.
Yeah.
Well, I did an article for Dell Horoscope last year about 2020. That was the title of it, but it's really the period of 2019 through 23, about a 4-year period. And we all know now, the astrologers are very hip to this. We get it. There's going to be a massive buildup in the sign of Capricorn when Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto all junked on top
right
of
around April 2020. It's going to be a big, huge heap of mess.
It's going to be a mess, and I don't care. We will. Of course, we all have our ideas as to how it's going to manifest. But you and I are talking about financial right now.
Right.
And so when I was down in Baltimore, I used the charts in the New York Stock Exchange and America to 2020. And the next day I'm walking through the hotel, and a woman that I had never met before, she runs up to me, says to me, I was in your lecture yesterday. I have to tell you scared the hell out of me. I laughed. I said, good. I want you to be protected. That my goal isn't to scare you. My goal is to get you ready so you will make, some decisions in advance. And
yes, exactly. Yeah, that's what astrology is all about. To be forewarned is to be forearmed.
That's right. That's exactly right. Now, we take into account, of course, what's happening politically, and I'm not going to get into Republican versus Democrat. it's the split.
It's the split. You can't deny that. No, it doesn't matter what party you're from. You know that there's a split.
And there is literally no meeting of the minds. Mm-hmm. Either you watch Fox News or you watch MSNBC. Nobody watches, and even if you watch both, you hate one, you love the other.
Exactly, and there's very few in between who offer an objective view at this point because it's just too hard to find.
It's frightening because it's so polarizing. And when America gets to that point, I mean, think when any society gets to that point, it's very frightening. But in this country, we are so used to, we have a Sun-Saturn square in our natal chart. America, of course, born on July 4th, 1776. And people with a Sun-Saturn aspect tend to be conservative.
Right.
And they tend to want to lean, a little to the left, a little to the right, but they don't like the fringes. Look at what happened after the 60s. The 60s, sex, drugs, rock and roll, oh my God, hippies, LSD, everything. So what did they do afterwards? They elected Richard Milhous Nixon.
Exactly the opposite of what we felt at the time.
Right, exactly. And that's what happens when you're a Sun-Saturn person. Yeah. And when you're a Sun-Saturn country, you do the same thing. Well, what happened after 8 years of Obama? They elected Trump.
Yeah, exact opposite again. The pendulum swung the exact opposite direction, radically opposite direction.
Well, that's the problem. It's swinging too radically.
Yeah, it's going too far.
Look, I never thought I would say that I miss George W. Bush, but considering that it was. Whatever any of your listeners may think about any of the people we're talking about, that's not my goal. My goal is not to pick on any party or anything else. But there is a point at which that pendulum swing becomes so radicalized that it's dangerous to the society.
It's dangerous to the basic foundational structure of democracy. That's what the problem is. We cannot have division and expect it to be a productive working society. We have to have balance in that.
Right, and compromise.
Compromise, exactly. We're not getting any of that. And this is not before we go any further, I want to say we are not being political commentators or pundits in this regard. We are simply stating what we see within the realm of astrology. So through the lens of astrology, this is what the story is. It's meant to be an unbiased, unpartisan, nonpartisan view. So that's just for the record there.
Yes, absolutely. And whatever, if I want to go out and rant and rave, personally, that's
you can go stand on the edge of Central Park on a soapbox and rant and rave.
Exactly. Exactly. As Woody Allen once said, or you could be one of those guys, with drool standing on screaming about socialism in the street. But it is important, I believe, to keep that perspective, because what happens with a Sun-Saturn person or country or company or anything else,
any entity,
if that stability gets shaky, then the whole thing falls apart.
It's very tenuous,
and that's what's happening in America. Look, we know that this buildup is happening in Capricorn. We know we are going through our Pluto return, something the individual will never go through until they extend our life span, because it takes 240 years or so for Pluto to come back. But we are going through our Pluto return. And because it's not just the Pluto return, but, as Voltaire once said, God is a comedian playing to an audience that's afraid to laugh. We also have Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn on top of the Pluto at the same time.
Just to make it even spicier. Yeah.
Exactly. What the hell? Let's really push it to the limit. And so what we're facing here is a buildup of energy that will demand. Now, I use the Koch house system. There are several house systems that are used. Some people like Placidus or equal houses. It doesn't matter. If you really want to get into here, have some fun, go into a discussion of astrologers fighting over house cusps. But I've always found that the Koch system works best, and it always worked best for me, both in medical reads, which I do a great deal of, but also in the stock market. And so I have plenty of evidence that it works. And with the Koch system, Pluto rules the 12th house in America's chart. And the 12th house is the collective. It's the unconscious. It's and that's exactly where this power is being built up. People are so angry. You can walk into Starbucks anywhere in any city in this country and get into a fight. Because it's not just a matter of, well, we like this party, we like that party, we don't care for what this doing that. It's so black and white, which of course is what we say for Scorpio. I met a woman once who painted a spider's web around her right eye every morning. She would get up and do it. And I said to her, "Are you Scorpio?" She said, "No." I said, "Really?" She said, "No, my moon and ascendant are." And I laughed.
You figured that's right. Yeah, no, this is a very, very telling time, which is why I think that we're on the cusp of a historical precedent. And I hate to use that word too lightly, but we really are. When these three planets gather in Capricorn, we are looking at the new day where things are torn down. Structures that we've lived with for so long are torn down and reinvented, which you could ultimately say is for our better good at the longer end of the picture. But it is not going to be fun getting there, I don't think.
Look, if I was 22, I might see it a little differently, because the 60s, the revolution of the 60s, 70s, the cultural revolution, tore down a lot of things, but we were young and we believed in it, and isn't this wonderful, and we're going to grow into it. And, truthfully, I looked at some of my older friends and parents and whatnot, and while a lot of them were certainly against the war, they didn't quite understand what was happening socially. And of course, it was a result of the baby boomers being born with Uranus in Libra. In Cancer and Neptune in Libra, and that square taking place. That was, just had to tear apart, everything, marriage and all of that. So they did that. that. But now we're at a different place. We're literally tearing down the very political structure of America.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get off track because I know you want to talk about the finances. So
this is important. This is an important part of what makes the finances work, though. If the country, and we're the capitalist society of the world, this is directly tied. I see them being correlated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why when I do lectures, I use both the stock exchange chart and America's chart. Mm-hmm. You can't separate the two.
Right.
And the correlation between the two, by the way, at some point, you and I, if we have a few minutes, we'll sit down and I'll show you. It's absolutely remarkable how things don't happen by accident. There are no accidents. There's a purpose for everything. There's free will, but there's a purpose for the karma that comes along. And we're at a point now with unquestionably, we are going to see major changes in the way that finances work worldwide.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's going to be, it may not be a cash society any longer. We may be at that point where we're into the total electronic world at that point in time.
Well, there are a lot of people who believe it. People ask me, what do I think of Bitcoins? And my answer is, I've seen too many bubbles in my life. And I'm concerned that all of these cryptocurrencies are nothing but a bubble waiting to collapse. All it will take is for a couple of countries to outlaw them. And the price of Bitcoins will drop down to $1.40. I was not on the floor when the Hunt brothers tried to corner the silver market, but I was down there many years later, but I heard all about it. Mm-hmm. And they decided they wanted to own all of silver. These were two billionaire brothers from Texas. And so the price of silver went from about $7 an ounce to, I forget, $60 or $80. I don't have my notes in front of me. And then the government stepped in and said, okay, that's it. You can no longer – they changed the rules is what they did. They changed the rules of margin. And within 2 days, the price of silver dropped to $10 and people lost everything. Of course, those who were smart took their money before then and got out. Mm-hmm. But those who didn't absolutely lost everything. So people say to me, I'm going to go into Bitcoins. I say to them, but Bitcoins cost a fortune now.
Yeah,
it's like buying oil when it gets to $140 a barrel. Oh, no, it's going to go up and up and up and up and up. Well, it doesn't.
It's got to have a ceiling at some point in time, and I think that's what we're seeing in the stock market. I mean, it's very reminiscent when the stock market is like this of the time and of the Black October. I think it was 1989. Was that when it was?
87.
87. Yeah, when we had a similar situation, and I actually expected it to sort of pop before now, but I think there's more buildup that's going to happen before we really have a big bubble burst.
Well, I'll tell you something funny about that particular crash. First of all, I was playing piano bars at the time, and my agent sent me into a piano bar, and she said, "Oh, you're going to make a fortune. It's all Wall Street people." And I walked into the bar, and there were 3 drunks laying at the bar. The place was dead. I said to the bartender, "What happened?" He said, "The stock market crashed." And that was the end of piano bars in New York.
Oh, interesting. Wow, yeah.
That was the end of the business. They all took their pianos out and put a 4-top in and hoped for the best. But that crash was an electronic crash. It wasn't a fundamental crash. There was no reason for the crash.
It was a mechanical failure.
Yeah, because they had put in this new system of automatic shorting. When the market went to a certain point, the computers kicked in, and that's what happened. And it dropped 508 points in one day. At that time, that was a 26% drop.
Yeah, big drop.
One day. Today, of course, the market's up at 22,000. So if it dropped, 500 points, it would be a big day, but it wouldn't do what it did then.
Well, it wouldn't do what it did then percentage-wise, but it would be significant. We've seen some big drops over the last several months. We've seen some 300-point drops, I think.
Yeah, but 300 points to 22,000.
I know. It's actually 23.
It's a matter of percentages.
Yeah,
you're right.
You're right. Yeah.
It's not a matter of numbers. And they become the best way to pay attention to what that means is to see the difference between the Dow and the S&Ps and the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ, the Dow is trading at 10 times what the NASDAQ is. So if the Dow drops 50 points and the NASDAQ drops 50 points, the percentage is huge in the NASDAQ.
Much different. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Well, that's completely different. They're different entities. The New York Stock Exchange, the Dow, the S&Ps, they all follow each other. They are all of a kind. The NASDAQ is a completely different animal. And as you would expect, it's Jupiter Uranus is what created that entity.
Yeah.
And so it responds in a Uranian fashion, not in a Saturnine fashion.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I can completely see that. This is an interesting area of astrology, I think, because you can see the reality so clearly there. We're talking today with Mitchell Scott Mitchell Scott Lewis, rather. His website is mitchastro.com. I encourage you to go check there. He's also author of many interesting books that are astrology based. They're really cool. He uses astrology as the premise for the action that takes place in the mysteries. So I encourage you to look at that. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back. We're going to continue our discussion about the markets, the volatility that we can see on the horizon. So hang in there and we'll be right back.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today. Or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Okay, welcome back. We're talking today with Mitchell Scott Lewis. He's an astrologer and an author out of New York City. His website is mitchastro.com. He spent a lot of time in the markets over his youth and has been able to fuse his two talents of working in the markets and then knowing the background of astrology to get a really interesting take on where the markets are going. When we look at the future of America coming up into the 2020s, when we see major movement on a lot of levels, we're going to finally see, what we have going now, when we talk about income inequality, when we talk about, the middle class not getting any money, without the middle class getting money, this machine does not work. And sooner or later, people have to come up to that conclusion. And that is the major underlying problem. There's no money in the middle class. If they took the money that they used to bail out TARP back in 2009, or whatever it was, $700 billion they used that, and distributed to the American people, we would have gone out and bought cars and TVs and everything else, and we would have brought this economy surging back. That never happened. So the collection of money stays at the top, and it never trickles down, regardless of what anybody says. We've seen that happen over and over again. That theory just does not float, and yet they're still trying to market it to us today. When you see this all coalescing, coming up into 2020, when Pluto is there, we're having our Pluto return, we got Saturn there, we got Jupiter there, I see, the way I put it together is a major, meaning Jupiter, large, very expansive, corrective, meaning Saturn, destruction and then rebuilding. That's what I think it's going to be. It's going to be
I absolutely agree. I think that's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
Along the lines of something we might have seen in the Depression, perhaps just as bad, if not worse. I mean, it's bankruptcies, student loans, car loans, all of these things are going to, people are getting credit left and right because that's the only way they can live. They're living on credit, not cash.
Right.
And that's where it's going to fall.
Absolute. Look, Chris, that's one of the problems with this tax bill that Congress is trying to pass, because it's simply taking all what they want to do, what the Republican Party wants to do and has wanted to do since 1933, is do away with Roosevelt's New Deal.
Yeah.
They do not want to finance Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, unemployment benefits, food stamps. And I understand that if you feel that people are taking advantage of a system, you may want to rebalance it. Well, it was a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, regardless again of what anybody thinks of the individuals, who completely turned around welfare and changed the rules of it and limited a great deal of the so-called entitlements. I hate that term.
Well, I hate it too, but it is accurate. I mean, when you think about entitlements, you have to think of, if you think of society as a giant chain, okay, one long chain. If you have one weak link in that chain is no longer viable. So you have to think of it that way. I think you've got to think of it as, there's a people in the world that we cannot ignore, and it works fine in most of European countries. They've all got a really nice setup going over there. So that part, I think, is confusing. But, actually, an interesting point. You speak about Roosevelt. Did you know that Roosevelt put in place all of the things that Europe ended up implementing, such as socialized medicine, vacation time, the whole way that they live, and the higher tax rate? That was Roosevelt's plan. His plan was to bring that to the United States, but he died before he was able to push it through Congress.
That's true. It took Lyndon Johnson to push those things through.
Yeah.
By the way, there's a friend of mine gave me a biography of Johnson that works very well if you're being mugged, because it's about 4,000 pages long.
Yeah.
But it's an absolutely fascinating story. And of all people, Woody Harrelson is starring as LBJ in a new movie, and the reports are that he's terrific. I can't wait to see it. I hope he is.
I know. Bryan Cranston did him on Broadway, I think, and he did a great job. He's very convincing too. But I think Woody Harrelson is really apparently amazing. I've heard the exact same thing. And he did something that, and he was not, you can argue how you want to. He really was not the guy who we thought would be there. We thought JFK would be there, but Lyndon Johnson had a way about him. He's a real backwoods politician who's willing to look for compromise, willing to work on both sides of the aisle, and did the whole poverty thing. He did the whole poverty thing. That was just...
LBJ was one of those people. There's an old saying, the times make the man. And LBJ came into the presidency as a bully senator, used to getting his own way, and they stuck him in the vice presidency, which was a meaningless job until Dallas.
Yeah.
And then he suddenly, for 5 years, ran the country and did more for the working class than anybody since Roosevelt. And now a lot of that they want to reverse.
Yeah.
And
but you can see the value of what he does, because when you distribute, everybody, the wealthy can still be wealthy. Nobody's saying take the money away. It's the degree of wealth. It's the amount of wealth. Why do you need that much?
The amount of money that goes in to these programs is relatively minuscule. When you compare that, they just the Times today had a report that Trump's desire to modernize our nuclear arsenal will cost $1.3 trillion. That's more than all of these programs put together, much more. And frankly, not particularly necessary, because if we ever have to use those weapons, who cares whether they're clean and shiny or not?
It's just a bluffing tool, and it won't do a damn thing for anybody. And for us to spend that much money, where are they going to get the money for that? Where are they going to get the money for the tax cut? Where are they going to get the money?
They're going to take it out of Medicare and Medicaid. That's what they're going to do.
I know.
And they're going to privatize Social Security. They're not going to get away with it. I'm inclined to think that you're probably right. I don't think they're going to get this tax bill passed, at at least not the way it is.
Not the way it is. There's going to be a lot of...
If they get any version of it passed, it's going to be a catastrophe for millions and millions of Americans.
Ironically, many of whom will be probably the Trump supporters. That's the thing.
Of course.
Yeah, or at least from red states. They're going to feel the pinch the worst, because a lot of people in red states, you take your deep southern states, there's an awful lot of people who are on entitlements in those states, and they're the ones that are going to feel the pinch. But I think that they're just so frustrated, they're willing to take anything. They're willing to grab at anything just to make it be different. And that's a real problem. That goes back to how politicians speak and how they do that. But we're getting off subject. When we look at this coming up into 2020, when you see those three planets together, very, very rare. I'm not even sure when the last time that was happened, if it has happened. I mean, it had to at some point, I suppose. But it's monumental. It's a collaboration of the highest order.
Well, it's not just that they're coming to a conjunct. And by the way, I had Mars, even though it's only going to pass through for a couple of weeks, that's going to be the trigger. Remember, when we look at, as you know, when we look at a client's chart, they may have a Pluto aspect happening that takes 2.5 years.
Of course.
But an inner planet will come along and bing, and that'll be it.
Yeah.
That'll be what sets off the event.
Mm-hmm.
It's also because America has 4 planets in Cancer. Mm-hmm. All of those Capricorn planets are going to oppose Venus and Jupiter and the Sun and Mercury. Mm-hmm. Then they're going to square Saturn in our chart and then conjunct the Pluto.
Yeah.
Now, in the New York Stock Exchange's chart, interestingly enough, this is a chart that has a Moon-Saturn conjunct in opposition to a Jupiter-Neptune conjunct. Oof. The Moon Saturn is in Aries and the Jupiter Neptune is in Libra. Mm-hmm. And they are at 19 to 26 to 27 degrees, exactly where the Saturn Pluto Jupiter conjunct is going to be. It's going to set off a square to all those planets. So when people say to me, isn't the stock market going to crash this week? I say no. What, it's going to go up? Yeah, it's going to keep going up for a while. We may see a correction. There's a difference. Remember, there's a difference between a correction, which sometimes cleans out, the drops Apple down to $110 so you can buy some of it back, and a crash. And crashes are very, very rare in this country. They used to have a lot more of them in the 1800s until they started to implement, after the crash of 29 and 31. Mm-hmm. It was really the crash of 31 that was the big one. 29 was a very small crash. It destroyed everybody's confidence. And it started the depression, but it was 31. 31 was 5 times as big a drop. But had you bought the stocks right then, the stock market went up until 37 when the Roosevelt recession hit, because the Congress demanded that he balance the budget, and so he had no choice. And that's what started the Roosevelt recession, and the only thing that got us out of that was the Second World War.
Second World War, yeah, which, of course, could get... I mean, when you look at what kind of a correction this would look like, do you think it's going to be sort of a devalue? I mean, Pluto represents complete and utter destruction and then reconstruction afterwards in a better form. When you look at this coming up, do you see this as a devaluation of all things that we hold materially? Do you see the devaluation of homes and real estate? Do you see?
I think it's a devaluation of everything. Yeah, and what bothers me more than anything else is that there are certain things that will never come back. For example, the Great Barrier Reef, as an example.
Of course, yeah.
That is dying, and the planet that is dying, and they want to drill in the Arctic, and they want to, and all of these things, so short-sighted, it's almost funny if it was happening to somebody else. Mel Brooks said something perfect. He said, difference between comedy and tragedy. Tragedy is if I cut my finger. Comedy is if you fall in an open sewer and die. It didn't happen to me. It's funny.
Right, exactly.
Now, this is happening to us, and I don't think it's going to be so funny to live through. And I'm really very concerned that what this is all going to build up to is more than just a financial problem, that we may very well be facing a crisis of ecological catastrophe.
I think we'll face ecological. I think we'll also face a question of our identity. I think we're no longer going to be. We're quickly becoming less than number one. We're on our way down the tubes there. At least that regard, with regard to the world. It's also going to be a reclassification of who we are, our identity, our values, our worth. almost everything about us is going to change, I think. I think it's going to be it's like the fall of the Roman Empire. We're charging head right into it.
I'm afraid you're right. And look, the truth of the matter is we're really not one country anymore.
No.
I would feel very nervous about putting my, driving cross country with New York State license plates.
Oh, I know. I went down to Tennessee this summer to witness the eclipse, and it gave me a lot of time to think about it. But the eclipse came right smack dab across the country, and if you could,
right.
I mean, you talk about symbolism and a divided country, and we are in a time that's very similar to where we were historically back in the 1850s, where we were leading up to the Civil War, where there was this division. So that could be a correction that we could easily come to, but I'm not sure how that would play out today.
Look what's happening around the world. Britain leaves Europe.
Yeah.
Scotland wants to leave Britain.
Catalonia
wants to leave Spain.
Yeah.
And on and on and on. And maybe Missouri and Texas and some other states decide, we don't want to do this anymore. And,
Yeah, I could see California seceding, on their own and becoming their own. I mean, they could become a country under themselves. I could see
California has the 8th largest economy in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's just insane.
Separate from the United States, the 8th largest economy in the world. It's huge. But look at what happened also after that eclipse. The catastrophic hurricanes and fires and all of it. And so, yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Chris, this is why you and I stay in astrology, because year after year we see these things and we chuckle to ourselves, and say, "Oh my God, here it is," and it's exactly what we expected on whatever level, however psychic you're being at the moment that you're going to see the actual reason. But when I look at the New York Stock Exchange's chart, and like I said, I have gone all the way back hundreds of years, and I have all this research, and I see what's happening there, and then I look at America's chart. I'd say there's very little doubt, but that we are going to be in an economic catastrophe, and it may very well be a lot different. 2008. Literally, it was the policies of the government that saved this country. Mm-hmm. We would have had no car companies left. There would have been none. And they had to bail out the banks again, whatever you might think personally or politically. Truth is, without banks, what are we going to do? Trade beads?
Yeah, you can't.
So, however they define it. Now, what's going to happen in 3 years if we have a government that doesn't care or that has a different perspective? And then you're not going to see bailing out. Nobody's going to bail us out if they don't believe in the system.
Well, and there's no one who's going to be able to bail us out unless they're going to own us. Somebody like China might bail us out, but China's going to be the leader by then for sure.
Yeah, but remember in 2008, what a government does, what our government does is we sell bonds, and we pay people a small percentage to buy our bonds. They virtually lending us money, and everybody's in debt, including the countries. And so, we get whatever the percentage is. In 2008, other countries were paying us 0.1% or more to buy our bonds. There was no place on the planet that they felt their money was safe except in America.
Yeah. And
they bought our bonds and they paid to hold our bonds. Now, because of policies and what Janet Yellen has done and whatever, we're bailing out of, because our government also bought up a lot of bonds in order to, we used our own money. We just print money. We don't even print it anymore. We just hit a button and there's $1 trillion more. And of course, eventually it's going to get to the point where, how do you pay the piper?
Yeah.
And look, in Star Trek, there is no money in the future. Let's hope we get there. You just need food, you go and you take it.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's remarkable because the technology is moving very quickly. We know that things are going to change dramatically. We wonder how all of this is going to coalesce. I'm an optimistic person by nature, and I always try to find the silver lining somewhere. I think growth comes through hardship, and this may be what we have to do, what we have to go through in order to come out the other end. I think, the fact that we are where we are today, and it seems so absurd to everybody with regard to fake news and the delusion is so Neptunian, it's crazy. But the fact that where we are today gives me proof that is the case, and we're going to come through this okay. I really do believe that.
Look, I am an optimist too. I am not a doomsday prophet. I say that all the time. I say there's what am I going to gain? If I'm wrong, I look like an idiot. And if I'm right, there's nobody there to pay me. Doesn't make any sense. Right. But remember, America has a Mars-Neptune square in its chart, and we always forget that. As we often, sometimes I'll look at a client's chart, and I literally can't find Neptune. I have to search. I go, oh, there it is, because it buries itself so well. We have a Mars-Neptune square. We have a lot of fear in the nature of our country, and that's essentially what people are living on right now, is the fear.
I think it's fear, it's ambiguity, it's the uncertainty. The fact that there's this manipulation of imagery and media, and the fact that we can the digital world, the world of the digital everything is now digital. All those people who no longer have jobs, the photographers and the artists and the musicians, who everything is now digital. In that digital world, we are seeing a shift of the highest order that brings us to a spot where we don't even have a clue what's real anymore. We have to hang on to some things. I saw something the other day, said they now have software that they can make anybody say whatever they want to have them say and have it be filmed.
Yeah,
and they
agree.
They actually proved it by having a speech by George W. Bush where he got up and said something that was completely absurd, and it looked as if he was doing it. They were able to manipulate the imagery to that point. So that is a scary thing.
Look, there's an old saying, if you can imagine something, you can create it.
That's true.
And, again, I hate to sound like a Trekkie, but if you watch Star Trek and they have the holodeck where, at some point you and I may very well be able to go into Casablanca and interact with Rick and Ilsa and, change the story. Well, that's what's happening here. Mm-hmm. When you see J.C. Penney going out of business, and Macy's is going to go out of business, and all of these companies are going to go out of business, where this isn't when the horse and buggy stopped being important because cars were invented, well, they taught people to stand online at Ford and turn something, and then they made a lot of money. They made a good living, and you can't do that anymore. You need technological and knowledge to work in the computer world that many people simply don't have the skills for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're going to be so tech savvy and so tech heavy that the only way to resolve it. I mean, the hard, fast goods that you're talking about, like the Fords and all the hard, tangible items, material goods, are going to be less important to us. So they're all going to be distributed in some way. We're not going to have cars probably in the future. We're going to share cars, so that won't be an asset anymore. So there's whole markets that are going to dry up. Our economy is going to shift to something different. I think the idea of time travel is something that could actually be feasible.
Well, you talked to Einstein about that. And look, truthfully, let's say they do have time travel. Where would you go? Would you go back to the 60s, 70s?
I probably would go back to the 60s because I think they had the right motives back then, and I think that was a shining moment in my life because I was there at that time. I was born in 52. For me, that was a wonderful time. I really believed in my heart and soul that we had it right, and then everything changed. It just for that brief period of time, I thought, wow, this is fabulous. We have found the way forward, but it wasn't to be.
Yes, there was a great spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
But we need a generation born. I do a lot of children's charts, and I look at them, and of course that's, you start to look at the generational planets, and you say, well, my young man or woman, what are you going to grow up to be? And you look at this group that are going to be born over the next few years with all these Capricorn planets.
I know. It's just incredible. It's a tough road to hoe, but they're the ones who we will rebuild, because in Capricorn there is that quality. They're the great builders. They're the great.
Right.
They will rebuild out of the ashes, and it may take us another 200 years to become the United States that we once were, and we won't be around to see it. At least I don't think we will. That's what we're going to need. That's what we're going to need. We need people with big visions. We need people who are able to see beyond that. I just had a grandson back in February. So I got a little Aquarius out there guy who's growing up. He's got a Libra a Libra moon and a Libra ascendant. I could see him doing something great because he's going to be prepped for this.
That's very nice.
They're going to have to do this. They have no choice.
But my problem is that the Capricorns are very solid, but they're not visionaries. It's not what Capricorn does. They can envision building a company or something like that, but they don't have that spark that the Aquarians have, or
they don't have that sort of that greater vision. I think the Aquarians have that big view. I love that big view that they have, like a Roosevelt or a Lincoln.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They had the bigger, stronger view of what's going on and how things are looking, and they're not so self-centered. They weren't all me. They were very much devoted to their cause. It's so much so that their own personal relations often failed as a result. They were too outwardly looking. They looked outward too much.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah. But that's one of the issues we're going to be dealing with this Capricorn generation. Well, you and I will be around in 20 years. We'll see them growing up.
Yeah, that's my assumption. That's my plan. Let's put it that way. I'm planning on being around. I'm desperate to see this all unfold. I'm so curious to see how it comes out, and I know there's going to be surprises in there for everyone, and I hope that we can learn from this. I do think that hardship promotes growth. I think that that's how people learn to adapt and get used to new ways. But the amount of credit debt that we have, either in cars or student loans, I mean, the student loan situation is another bubble that's just waiting to burst, right? I mean,
of course. Back in the 70s, they forgave all the student loans.
Yeah,
I don't know if you remember that, but all the baby boomers, they didn't know anything all of a sudden. We need, of course, a different government for that. But in terms, just to because we're probably running out of time, just to reiterate, while I do think that the markets are way overvalued, I agree. I don't think, and it all comes down to this tax bill. People are buying the stock market on the assumption that the tax bill will be passed. If the tax bill gets passed, that in itself will damage the stock market. And if it doesn't get passed, that will also damage it. So we're in a way, there's an old saying on Wall Street, buy the rumor, sell the fact.
Well, this case is both the rumor and the fact are not good.
Well, exactly. But that's my point. It doesn't matter which way this goes. Ultimately, it's going to put a serious crack in the equity markets. Mm-hmm. And since that's where most of the wealth of America is, that's where you're going to see. And the housing market also is way, way overvalued. They have overbuilt.
Ridiculous.
In New York and in Boston and in Austin, Texas, and in Miami. It's just insane. And eventually you're going to see empty houses and companies folding and $1 trillion, devalued in our system. And that's when you're going to see your stock market crash. And I think that the real crash doesn't happen until at least 19. I think we have another year. Also, Saturn going into Capricorn, very important moment.
Right.
Uranus going into Taurus.
Right.
A very, very important moment. Taurus rules money. It's the second house, of course.
Yep.
But when it first goes in, it creates that trine to Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first few months, May, June, July, I forget the exact dates, I have them somewhere, you'll see the markets actually stabilize. And that'll be a fake out. Because as soon as that trine separates, that's when you start to see the problems.
Yeah.
So it could be as early as late summer 2018 when the cracks start to really show.
Mm-hmm. And there will be no place to put stuff either, because there's really no place to run at that point. When you start, there's no place to run. Where are you going to run? You can't. Real estate may get devalued. What do you do if it does? I mean, you stay put. If you're somebody whose value is in your house, do you stay put?
Well, yeah. There's a difference between living in your home and holding on to it, and speculating, which so many people are doing now in real estate. And the speculative market is going to collapse. And when that happens, well, then a lot of people, and I've got a lot of clients who are in money, they're financial people, especially in real estate. And I keep warning them. I say, look, if I were you, I would take some out. I would get partners to buy into your companies to protect yourself. No, it's going to keep going up. It's going to keep going. Well, okay. But again, those who pay attention to me, do pretty good.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that's all you need to say. That's all it takes, is that it's there and you got it, and it's a fascinating place to be. If the banks begin to fall and fail, and you own your home, and the banks can't come after you anymore, that's okay. Then you kind of got away with your house, I guess. That's one way of looking at it.
It's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
And again, we're not sure they're going to really ever break up these banks. Remember, don't forget that just recently the Republican Congress voted to deregulate the banks.
I know. Yeah. I know.
And that was, they don't understand. I mean, they understand, but the people who voted for them don't quite get what that's going to mean. And by doing away with Frank Dobbs,
Dodd-Frank.
Dodd-Frank, yeah, is just the potential repercussions are going to be astronomical.
Yeah.
Remember, they used to be able to charge you $35 if you went into Starbucks and you didn't have the $2.12 in your account. They would instantly charge you $35.
Oh, I know. My son got nailed with that many times.
and now,
tough lesson.
They can't do that, and they've made a lot of changes, and so people are taking all this for granted. And those who don't pay attention say, well, who cares about the regulations, because they don't know that that's affecting them day to day.
Yeah, they don't.
And, therein lies
therein lies the fault. Therein lies the fault, and it all goes to hell. Anyway, we've been talking today with Mitchell Scott Lewis. He's a great astrologer who's done a lot of work with finances and also with medical astrology as well. His website is mitchastro.com. He's also written several books about astrology, but not about astrology per se, using astrology as the backdrop or the premise for great mysteries. And I encourage you to look at those as well. He's very prolific in that area. His website, again, is mitchastro.com. I encourage you to see, and if you ever get a chance to see him speak, do so, because you'll learn more about the finances of astrology and how it works and when to hold and when to fold than you could possibly imagine. So I encourage you to do that again. And Mitch, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Chris. It's always great to talk to you, my friend.
Always have a good time. Very good, man. Take care.
Take care of yourself. Bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.